Joining us now is the House Democratic leader, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries of New York. Sir, we appreciate your time this morning. To start with, on Congressman Johnson, given the fact that there appears, at least based on that sound, that there is momentum behind him, is this somebody you believe Democrats can work with across the aisle?
Well, good morning. Great to be with you. I don't know Mike Johnson well. Based on his track record, he appears to be an extreme right-wing ideologue. Mike Johnson wants to criminalize abortion care and impose a nationwide ban. Mike Johnson was one of the chief architects of trying to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. Mike Johnson also wants to end Social Security and Medicare as we know it. Those are extreme views, and House Democrats will push back aggressively against that. However, at the same period of time, we've said from the very beginning of this Congress and demonstrated that we are ready, willing, and able to find common ground with our Republican colleagues in order to advance bipartisan solutions to solve problems for hardworking American taxpayers. And all Mike Johnson will need to do is to meet us in a bipartisan way in that fashion, and we'll be able to work together whenever and wherever possible.
Mr. Leader, I was talking to a Republican congressman last night who I wouldn't put in the Mike Johnson category ideologically. He said, look, we have to do something. That's why people are moving in this direction, framing it as if there was no other alternative. Had a resolution been put on the floor, or if a resolution is put on the floor to more broadly empower the Speaker pro tem, do you think Democrats would support it? Would you ask your members to support it?
Well, we would have to have a caucus discussion, but we have made very clear from the beginning that we looked toward a bipartisan path to reopen the House. And one of the possible routes was to provide support necessary in order to empower a Speaker pro tem to reopen the House in order for us to be able to consider bills that are important to the health, the safety, and the economic well-being of the American people, to fund the government, to avoid a shutdown, to make sure that we are standing by our friends and allies like Israel and Ukraine during their time of need, as well as to provide humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians who may be in harm's way. These are important items, and if reopening the House required a bipartisan agreement with respect to the Speaker pro tem, I think that that is something that we would have been open to, as we have repeatedly expressed publicly and communicated to our Republican colleagues privately.
You have 23 days until the government is set to shut down again. This process, if it ends today, has burned 21 days, 22 days at this point in time. I believe Mike Johnson was committing to, once again, doing standalone appropriations bills. There's no way to reconcile all 12 of them in that amount of time. Are we headed for another government shutdown or towards the possibility of a government shutdown?
House Democrats, along with President Biden, Senate Democrats, and Senate Republicans, are prepared to do what's necessary to meet the needs of the American people, avoid a government shutdown. And the path to doing so is for House Republicans to adhere to the agreement that they themselves negotiated in May of this year with respect to the Fiscal Responsibility Act. That set top-line spending numbers for us to utilize in order to reach agreement on the spending priorities and needs for the American people. It was Republicans who, less than a week after supporting that agreement that they negotiated with President Biden, broke their word, abandoned the agreement, and that is why we're facing a possible government shutdown. And so the notion of doing individual appropriations bills at this point, after Republicans have been wasting time mired in chaos, dysfunction, and extremism, doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Would you accept some reduction in the top line of a continuing resolution in order to help a new speaker?
No, an agreement is an agreement. And basically, we have all adhered to the parameters of what was agreed upon and passed into law, which meets the needs of the American people. The House Democrats are in agreement with the Senate Democrats. We both are in agreement with Senate Republicans. All of us are in agreement with President Biden. It's the extreme MAGA Republicans in the House who are on an island. They need to get off that island and join us in a bipartisan way so we can fund the government responsibly.
Another issue this, to put it kindly, circus has delayed is the consideration of the $105 billion supplemental aid request that includes money for Ukraine as well as for Israel and humanitarian support for citizens of Gaza. Would you be willing to separate those out, particularly the Ukraine-Israel humanitarian aid issue, given some of the Republican opposition there?
No, it's my expectation that the Senate will send over a bipartisan bill that meets the needs of the American people from a national security standpoint, and that necessarily involves being supportive of Israel in its war against Hamas, being supportive of the Ukrainian war effort against Russian aggression. It's in the best interest of the free world that we stand by Ukraine, that Ukraine prevail. It's in the best interest of democracy and freedom and truth, values that we hold dear here in America. And we also, of course, must meet the humanitarian needs of people throughout the world, including Palestinian civilians who may be in harm's way. That bipartisan package, when it comes over from the Senate, shouldn't be broken up. The time for partisanship is over. The time for gamesmanship is over. The time for extreme MAGA Republican brinksmanship is over. We need to reopen the House, get back to doing the business of the American people. Let's do it in a bipartisan way so we can solve problems for everyday Americans.
I understand your opposition to where Mike Johnson stands ideologically and on policy, but you're known, and this might surprise some people outside of Washington, to have good relationships with members across the aisle. You had a good relationship, have, TBD, with the former Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Have you spoken to Mike Johnson in the last 24 hours? Do you plan to speak to him right away if he ends up becoming Speaker?
I have not spoken to Mike Johnson over the last several weeks at all during this period of Republican chaos and dysfunction. However, we should always agree to disagree without being disagreeable and find common ground in order to meet the needs of the American people. And so if Mike Johnson does emerge as the next Speaker of the House of Representatives, I do look forward to having a conversation with him to figure out how we can agree upon a bipartisan agenda that is designed to put people over politics. We can fight collectively, as Democrats have been doing, for better paying jobs and lower costs and safer communities, and to build an economy from the middle out and the bottom up, as opposed to the top down.
What is your relationship like with Kevin McCarthy now?
Well, listen, we had a very positive, forward-looking relationship. I haven't spoken to him in the last few weeks. But if Kevin McCarthy remains a member of Congress, I expect that we'll find opportunities to be able to work together whenever and wherever possible to meet the needs of the people that he represents in California, that I'm privileged to represent in New York City, as well as the needs of the American people.
All right, House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries, it's been a long 3 weeks. We'll see how things go today. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Phil.